Now, we record these services, so somebody's going to see this and not have a clue, and they'll be watching Bozo the whole time instead of me. So let's do that right there. You can just kind of see his, this is an engineering feat, The kids couldn't figure it out, but somebody had to think this up. It took somebody with some engineering design that understood certain laws, right? That understood that if you weight the bottom, the top would swing back and forth. And I start wondering what happened to all the really great thinkers in the world. I mean, somebody thought that up. People came up with great theories, major discoveries, like things in mathematics. How about how gravity works? We're all about the Apollo 11 landing on the moon. How does gravity work and affect us? How does electricity work? And these fellows and the people that discovered these wonderful, I guess they're laws of nature, but they put words to them. It seems like they're not as many around anymore. Is that just me? Like they always lived like 200 years ago or 300 years ago or 1,000 years ago. And then I start to wonder, have we run out of wisdom thinkers? Right? We're in this series called A Common Sense Faith, and it made me just start to wonder, how did they come up with all of these designs? Where did they get the imagination? Where did they get just putting these little pieces together that begin to make sense? And I have an answer for you today. I've said before, there's nothing new in Hollywood. Everything Hollywood ever does is already in the Bible. They just copy the Bible and they sell it to us, right? And we go spend $14, that's just for the popcorn, to get into the movie theater. True story. So anyway, I have a theory. If there's nothing new in Hollywood, it's already in the Bible. Could it be, go with me here, maybe they borrowed some of these great theories and discoveries out of the Bible? Could it be before Isaac Newton, there had been a Newtonian Jesus? Okay, hold that thought. You stay still. Right, great. Last week, we started this series, this common sense faith, by looking at how Jesus teaches. How does he teach us about being a sensible person? And the word there, we talked about phronimos. Don't worry about phronimos, but it can mean wise, but Jesus uses it to describe somebody who's more than wise. They're actually very shrewd, and if you look at the story of the shrewd manager, phronimos, wisdom, wise, that's the word. It's like good sense. It's more than just wisdom. It means being able to employ an idea, grabbing hold of it and employing that idea into real life behavior. So he uses that in a couple of stories. He did it, the parable of the shrewd manager I talked about. He also did it in the foundational passage for the series. And that was that parable of the house builders. There's a wise house builder and there's a what? Foolish house builder. And he tells that story. And at the end, that's in Matthew 7, 24 through 29. We're not going to read that today. We'll allude to it just a little bit. But in that story, Jesus likens folks with good sense, folks with common sense faith, you see on the screen right there, he likens that to somebody who builds on a really solid foundation. And he said, if you do these things, right? I told the parable, but there was stuff that came before it. He said, if you do these things, and there's 10 of them, so if you do these 10 things, you're going to be on the road to being a sensible person of faith. You'll have sensible faith. So we're going to get into number 1 on the list. I'm going to go through all 10 today. You don't have anything, right? I'm kidding. Just number 1 on the list today. So number 1 on the list is this. The first step in common sense faith comes out of Matthew 7. It's verses 1 and 2. I have it on the screen there in a couple of versions, but I'm going to read it out of the New Revised Standard Version. It says this. Remember, this is his list. He's going through 10 things, and the parable came at the end. He says, do not judge so that you may not be judged. For with the judgment you make, you will be judged. I hate when the Bible talks like that. It's like, let me make sense of this. Well, that's what we're going to do today. And the measure you give will be the measure you get. So there it is. In other words, in a more simpler way, do not judge so you won't be judged. For the judgment you make, hey, that's going to come right back to you. Kara, could you put that back up for a minute there? I like the, there's different translations out of the Greek, and I like this one out of, I'm going to block on it, the Phillips translation. It says this: you will be judged by the way you criticize others. Okay, why didn't they say it in the first place? I can get that. That starts to go in the direction of making sense. So here's the teaching, number one, if you're a note taker. Criticizing people will hurt you, right? Criticizing people will hurt you. Now, can be a bit hard to understand, and I've talked about this in worship before in the messages, because judgment is such a delicate word in some senses, because judgment is a type of discernment, right? We're supposed to have discernment as Christians, and you can kind of define discernment in some cases as a particular type of judgment. And having standards is important. It's having a standard to evaluate, to move through life. We have to have that. If we have no standards through which we move through life, we're going to get in trouble. And that is common sense, right? That's how it works for me. I mean, that's how I navigate through the world. So this can be a little bit confusing for people of faith. It can be confusing for Christians. And it's really confusing for people who look in at us and they go, why do you act the way you do? Why do you say what you do? And then we incur a lot of wrath from particular people for some of the things some Christians say and do. Now, you got to look other places too. We want to look and see, what does Scripture really say about this idea of being a critical observer of life? So Paul in 1 Corinthians 5, first 5 verses, I'm not going to read that to you, but basically he says, I kind of expect Christians to pass judgment. He's going to say, I sort of expect that will work. We'll do that on one another. Okay, it's in the Bible. Let's back up a bit. First, note, the criticism is between who? Christians. It's not Christians criticizing non-Christians. It's Christians giving some kind of discernment toward other Christians, right? Second, it has certain distinctions in that statement. Again, I didn't read it, but you could take a little note, look at Romans 1 through 5, and you can read that later. These distinctions are, we're not going to be discerning about little petty things. We're not going to get into little digs toward people that we just don't like what they're doing very much. It was meant toward big issues like false prophets, serious behaviors that could really break down the Christian community, not the outside community. It was about Christian behavior. So we know there is some sense in how we do that, but Jesus is teaching us a different view of this idea of criticism. So why is he cautioning us and virtually guaranteeing that we're going to be a fool? He guarantees if we don't get this right, we're going to be like the fella who builds a house on sand. We know what happens when you do that in Florida, right? It doesn't work very good. He says if we use our critical nature by judging people, it's deadly for us. It's not healthy. It's not good. So I thought, okay, I kind of get that. Who wants to be around critical people, and why should we be judging anybody anyway and doing all that stuff? And so I think, okay, I kind of get Jesus. I've read the Gospels. I see how he interacts with people. So I know why he wants us to be this way. It's because he wants us to be nice, right? Well, I guess. He wants us to be nice. He wants us to have compassion. Maybe it's because he wants us to be non-hypocritical. He wants us to be open and inclusive. Now, all of those things, you can find all of those teachings throughout the Bible. And of course, they're wonderful attributes of behavior, which limit judgmentalism. I don't think that's the reason, though. I don't think that's why he's telling the story, the parable of the two builders. I don't think that's why he's starting with this list. I think there's something else he's trying to teach us if we have the ears to hear. Jesus' call to sort of quell down judgmental criticism of people, it may be, in fact, a secondary benefit, to protect others. Jesus doesn't want us hurting others. I gave you the little list. We know words have such power. Power to heal. They have power to really wound, deeply wound. So I don't think that's it. I think there's something else Jesus wants to protect us from. Remember, he's saying, don't do this, or it's like your house is going to collapse and fall apart. And then we get into Isaac Newton, right? You know, good old Isaac Newton. He published his laws of motion in 1687, and his third law of motion states right this. You know this. You can say it with me. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Always. So, and you go, okay, what does that mean? If you want to get real technical, here's the rest of it. In every interaction, there's a pair of forces acting on the two interacting objects. The size of the force on the first object equals the size of the force on the second object. Are you with me? No. You want to see it? Isn't that much simpler? If Newton had only had Bozo the Clown, everything would have been fine. Everybody would have understood what he was saying. If you apply Newton's law, remember I said, I think everything in the Bible, they got it first. I don't know if Newton got it out of this bit, but here it is. If you apply this law to judging people, it means that if you are critical of a person, that force of criticism will push back on you equally. Are you with me? Does it make sense yet? It's going to push back on you equally. It's like the clown. And it's not just human beings this happens to. You know, even animals get caught up in this whole idea of the third law. Watch this. Right? So there's the third law. Whatever action you do is going to come back to you, and it'll knock, if you're a dog, it knocks you off the table, and that's not very nice. It's somewhat, I don't want to mix all the metaphors here, but it's somewhat like a boomeranging verdict with a twist, or maybe sort of like what goes around, comes around, but not exactly. It kind of has a twist to it. In this case, the equal and opposite reaction becomes the standard that bounces back onto our lives. Now, I don't know what you do when you hear that. It makes me want to stop and think a bit, because what I think Jesus is saying here is that in our behaviors, we create, get this, we create a critical template that becomes the standard through which we have to pass through. And we use templates all the time. Templates are great. They're very important. They produce great goods for us, a way to evaluate, sort of see if something passes muster. Do you know what pass muster means? Tim, I know you know what pass muster means, right? If you're in the military, it means you made it. You kind of, if you're in the military, you had to be proper, and you passed the inspection, right? You passed, it's a critical standard to identify a particular outcome. It's like our critical outflow toward others becomes, maybe this is a good one for 2019, it becomes an algorithm by which our behavior is judged. Now, for those of us that were born in 1957, I had to go look this up. Algorithm, a formula for solving a problem based on conducting a sequence of specific actions. All I know is if I go to my computer and I misspell a word and I hit spell check, it fixes it, right? It's an algorithm. It tells, somebody designed a standard, a template, which judges the way I type my words, and it tells me that I have a problem, right? It's a way of figuring out the problems. Now, here's the hard part, and why Jesus' teaching is absolutely, he says, don't do this thing. Don't judge and be critical in that way. It's because in this case, the standard, the algorithm, the template, however you want to see it, it's not originally, according to Jesus' teaching here, it's not originally determined by God. Who designs it? We do. Whoa, we design our own critical standard? You know, the Jews kind of got this. There was an old saying the Jews held that kindliness in judgment is nothing less than a sacred duty. It's almost like they knew, hey, how we treat others becomes sort of sacred somehow. And I don't know if they're thinking about that somehow God takes what we've done and grabs hold of it and turns it around toward us. I don't know if that's how it works, but the Newtonian Jesus says how you live by imposing a critical judgment, a standard. How you do that, that's how it's going to be done to you. And it's not only how it's going to be done to you, it's when it really counts. In other words, what's reflected back is that template, right? It's that algorithm of judgment and behavior. And it gets employed by God. Wow. So Jesus says, use common sense. Your critical judgments, he's talking to believers, people of faith, your critical judgments are the standard that could actually do you great harm. So when I said, why is Jesus teaching this as number one? He's teaching it because he's looking out for us. It's not just about the other person. He's looking out for you and I. He doesn't want any harm to come to his family, to his children. We're his current day followers. And he looks and says, I don't do these. I know it's going to cause you harm, and I can see it. Don't fall into that judgmental pit. You know, when I thought about this, whoa, I told Terry it's a hard message today. Here's why I think it's hard. Because if somebody took the 65 years, how old am I? 62, thank you. Wow. I just gained 3 more back, right? I got 3 more back. If I went back and took 62 years worth of my judgmental statements and they become the template, the algorithm by which God will apply to me, oh, that's heavy. That's why we believe in a God of grace and a God of forgiveness. But it doesn't mean we continue doing, right? Paul doesn't say just to continue sinning boldly. There's an article a fellow wrote, his name's Todd Smith. He says, there's no denying the fact that our lives are a mere image of the decisions that we make. He says, basically right now, in our actions, today, even when we leave this place, we're creating the standard of our own judgment. So if you want to leave here today a little bit wiser, which is my goal, to have a common faith for our worshiping community, there's 3 things I want to quickly run through. These are not elaborate. I'm trying to give you some concrete examples of some ways to pay attention to this common sense teaching. The first is be conscious of our critical nature. I became conscious of my critical nature. I actually began to look, okay, over all these years, whoa. When I make decisions today, now, after working on this message, I am more aware of my own critical nature and how that hurts me. There was an Indian Jesuit priest, his name is Anthony DeMello, and he liked to tell the story, here's your concrete example, of 2 taxidermists. And they stopped in right in front of a window. There's an owl in the window on display. Now remember, they're taxidermists, so what do? We're going to get really critical. Let's see how well they did this owl. So they start looking at it. They start to criticize the way it was mounted. They criticize the way the eyes didn't look very natural. Its wings were not proportionate to the body, and its feathers are not neatly arranged. And its feet, they said, could definitely be improved. Now, when they finished criticizing the old owl slowly turned its head and winked at them. Do you think they might have used a little more awareness in their criticisms? Wow, maybe we went over the top when we start applying so much critique to a living animal we thought was a stuffed owl. So that's number 1, be conscious of a critical nature. Number 2, create the algorithm by which you wish to muster, that's past inspection, or pass through. Now, it's interesting. In the Olympics, I don't know if you know this, each recent Olympics, creates mascots. They get a mascot, and the mascot is based on a particular sense or feeling or goal. They try to grab the sense of a community, and they create a mascot that holds that sense of the community along with the Olympic values. The first time this happened was in the 1972 Munich Games, and the mascot was a popular little dachshund, very popular German dog, the little dachshund, and it was to reflect the culture of the host country, and people love that. The German people love the little dachshund, so they kind of grabbed hold of it. And then that was the first one, but you saw it again every Olympics since. But in 2002, in the Salt Lake Winter Games, they because it was in Salt Lake, they took the theme of Native Americans, and they tried to see what are those sort of global standards of athleticism in the Native American culture. And so they came up with several images. The hare is very swift. The coyote ascends the highest peaks. The bear is eternally strong. Those were exactly the sort of things that the Olympics held in high regard. So you can be like the little dachshund, Waldy was his name, or if you want to have a reflection be something like strong or rises to the highest. The point was that they created an algorithm based on the culture that they wanted to demonstrate. And we can do that too. We can act on that. How do you do it? How do you create that algorithm that you want to live by, that's actually the template by which you pass through as God looks at us? You can do it by living what I call the two-sided echo. Two-sided echo. There's an old Chinese proverb, goes like this: a bad word whispered will echo hundreds of miles, right? Bad word whispered will echo hundreds of miles. There's a story about this father and son. And they were out walking in the mountains. His son tripped and he fell down. He's kind of a little kid, he tripped. And so when he fell, he screams out, "Ah!" Right? And he hears back this response, "Ah!" And so he didn't get it. He didn't know what was going on. And so he says, "Who are you?" And he waits a minute, and here comes the echo back. "Who are you?" It's back and forth, back and forth. And so he started to get a little angry because the guy person wasn't responding back. And he says, "Coward!" What comes back? 1, 2, 3. Coward. Right, coward comes back. So he finally says, "Dad, what is, I don't understand this. What's going on?" So the father smiled and said, "My son, pay attention." And then he screamed out, "I admire you." The voice answers back, "I admire you." Then he screamed, "You're a champion." The voice comes back, "You're a champion." The boy was very surprised, but he didn't understand. Then his father explained, people call this an echo, but really, this is life. It gives you back everything you do or say. It's simply a reflection of your actions. So, if you want more love in the world, who wouldn't want that? Create more love, is the moral of the story, in your heart. If you want more competence in your family, your team, the people you work with, improve your competence. Remember, it's equal and opposite reaction. This relationship, he said, applies to all the aspects of life, and it will give you back everything you've given to it. It's basically just common sense. And if you want to take that first step, you could do that today, to have a common sense faith. Let's pray.